Welcome to Private Equity Profits. Clifford Locks is a certified board of director, a trusted confidant to CEOs, C-level exec, and high-potential employees to help them clarify goals, unlock their potential, and create actionable strategic plans. Seth Greene is the nation's foremost authority on growing your business. He is the founder of the direct response marketing firm Market Domination LLC, and he is a 7-time best-selling author who has been interviewed on NBC, CBS, Forbes, Inc., CBS Money Watch, and many more. Cliff and Seth interview top players in the financial sector, focusing on private equity and real estate funds, discussing developments and trends shaping the industry. These experts will share with you how they've leveraged the power of equity funding to grow their businesses and increase profits, and how you can too. And now, here's your host, Cliff Locks.
Welcome to the Private Equities Profit Podcast. I'm Cliff Locks, your host, and with me today is Dave Liu, the founder of Lucrative. Dave's a 30-year veteran of Wall Street in Silicon Valley. He's earned his MBA at Harvard University, his finance and system science and engineering degree at Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He's an entrepreneur, has started multiple companies, and an advisor who's raised $15 billion for hundreds of companies, and an investor in a multi-billion-dollar exits. Dave is passionate about advancing new ideas in technology and entertainment, supporting philanthropic causes for the disadvantaged. He's a creator who enjoys writing books and drawing cartoons. Dave, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks so much, Cliff, for having me on.
Tell me about your background and how you got started and what led you to the specific career path.
I was born in the US, but I grew up in Asia, in Hong Kong, and then I came back to the United States to study. Really, what started me off on my career, and my first major career was working on Wall Street, was really fear. Fear of not having enough money, fear of not having enough food to eat, and fear of having to pay back about $100,000 of debt that I had when I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. And if I reflect back on that time, it was really, I was looking around and trying to figure out how to make myself imminently employable, how to make myself unique enough that I could get a job and get a job hopefully anywhere I wanted. During the time that I was studying, I took an internship at Goldman Sachs. It was really my first taste of Wall Street. I never, ever worked on Wall Street. I frankly didn't even know a whole lot about what it was. And I went in, I worked there for a summer. At the end of that summer, I realized that two things. One was that this was something that I think I could actually be pretty good at. When I looked around at some of the older guys and gals that worked there, I felt, I could see myself doing what they're doing. And then second, I saw that there was just a lot of money slushing around. I like to joke that when I worked at 85 Broad, which was in New York and was Goldman Sachs's primary headquarters, there was artwork on the wall, would fund 10 years of compensation for me. I realized pretty quickly that one, I'd be good at this, and two, I could probably make some good money in a relatively short amount of time. And man, when I was 18, 19 years old, I definitely needed a lot of money. My family and I, we were at poverty. I borrowed the maximum available to get through school. I wanted to make sure that I could take care of not just myself, but my family as well. And so that's really how I got started on Wall Street. I never really intended to stay 25 years, which is ultimately how long I stayed. But that's really how I got started in my first job and got my feet wet in the industry.
At some point, you started college focusing on science, specifically robotics and new technology. Somewhere you made a pivot towards a career in banking. What triggered that?
A little bit more detail on exactly what happened. My parents, who are traditional Asian American tiger parents, their dream was to have one of their boys go to an Ivy League school. And University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League. And so once I got in, my parents were pretty relaxed and they said, you can study whatever you want. Now that you're in, if you want to study math, you can study math. That's actually what I started studying. I studied math because I love math, and that was in the College of Arts and Science. But then midway through my first semester, freshman year, I got a phone call from my dad, and he said, look, I got some bad news. my business is going under. We don't have any money. And so we don't even have money for your tuition. And so you're on your own. At that point, I panicked, but then I collected myself and I rushed over to the career office and also to the financial aid office. At the financial aid office, I basically said, hey, look, I don't want to leave the school. I don't want to leave the school and go to some community college. Like, what's the maximum I can borrow? The kindest person, one of the most kind persons ever in my life, sat down with me and figured out through financial aid Tetris how I could essentially borrow the maximum amount, get a few grants here and there, to cover pretty much everything except for my living expenses. Second visit was to the career office to make sure I could get summer jobs, work-study jobs, a full-time job. I remember I sat down with the career counselor. I said, what kind of jobs can I get? I'm a math major. The career counselor kind of looked at me and like, well, most math majors do more math work. They become graduate students, they do research, et cetera. I said, look, that's not an option for me. I need to make sure I am highly employable. They started to show me some of the opportunities available for various degree programs. One of the groups that had a tremendous number of job offers was business students from the Wharton School. And so I said, okay, I don't know anything about business, but like this looks pretty interesting, particularly if these guys can get a lot of job offers. But then there was one program that got like a truckload of offers. That was a program called the Management and Technology Program at the University of Pennsylvania. It was the first program of its kind at the time and has since been replicated by great schools like Stanford and MIT and Harvard and UC Berkeley. But that program allowed you to not only get a business degree from Wharton, but also a full engineering degree from the School of Engineering and Applied Science at the University of Pennsylvania. The career counselor said, look, these M&T, which is short for Management and Technology, these graduates are like the belle of the ball. They're steeped in technology, engineering, and they have a great business degree. These are, if you're really concerned about making sure that you have job security, this is a great program, but it's really tough to get in. There's only 50 students a year. The transfer rate is really low. That didn't scare me. And so I worked really hard, got the grades necessary, and I transferred into that program in sophomore year. And so I ended up graduating with a full engineering degree in systems science and engineering, also graduated with a full business degree from Wharton. And when I was looking for full-time opportunities, I just to kind of cover all my bases, I interviewed not only on Wall Street, but management consulting and corporate America. So I had a lot of different options, but ultimately I decided to pursue a career on Wall Street because I felt that one, I could make money relatively quickly, which I needed, unfortunately. But two, on Wall Street, what I saw, which I didn't really see from any of the other jobs, was an opportunity to get exposed to very senior people at a really young age. I saw an opportunity for someone like me. I graduated at 19, a 19-year-old to sit in the same room with like C-level execs and board of directors. What I saw in traditional corporate America, which would have been the route I would have taken if I went more engineering, you were below layer and layer and layer of management. I was really excited about the opportunity to learn from very senior people, largely through osmosis and through observation, but I was really excited about the opportunity to get exposed to senior people at a really young age. So I would say that was another element of why I ultimately decided to go more of the finance and business route rather than the engineering route.
Double degree. I salute you. That's just tremendous. That was you worked hard. There's no question to it. My youngest has got his mechanical engineering degree, bachelor's and master's, and it's a lot of math. So you did the finance and the engineering side of it. Impressive.
Yeah, and I will tell you many years later, when I was a banker, I focused on internet and software and technology. Right. When I was an entrepreneur, I started not just companies in asset management, but also technology. Having that underlying foundation in both business and engineering has served me well throughout my whole life. I have no regrets. It was a ton of work, even though I never became a practicing engineer. Okay. I really feel that it made me a better business person, a better investor, a better board member. I really cherish what I learned those many years ago.
Well, you can see that project management expertise that you bring forth. It's sharp. Everyone faces some challenges when they start a career. You faced some challenges starting at a very young age. Can you talk about how some of those challenges contributed to your success?
Yeah, absolutely. I've only very recently started talking about this publicly because, frankly, I didn't want it to define me. But I was born with a very severe birth difference, which is called a bilateral cleft lip and palate. In layman's terms, I was born with essentially a hole in the center of my face. I had to undergo many, many years of treatment and surgery to fix it. My last treatment and my last surgery was at the age of 18. So for 18 years, I had frequent trips to the hospital, had 11 surgeries. So just a ton of work that had to be done. You see here the finished product after, hundreds of hours of work. Look, I'd be lying to you if I told you that it wasn't difficult. We unfortunately live in a visual world. I think it's even more visual now with social media. It's really hard to live with a birth difference that is visual and right in the center of your face. One of the things that I now believe in hindsight is it wasn't a curse, it was a blessing. I really do believe that it helped me become a much better business person, because there's a lot of research now done on what are some of the characteristics of successful people. And I think one of the things that people often talk about is resiliency and grit and the ability, frankly, to put up with a lot of crap. There's nothing like being teased or being ostracized or feeling as an outsider to make you build some real resiliency. So for me, I like to joke that being born the way I was born gave me a superpower, which has served me well in business, which is it not only made me thick-skinned, but it gave me like rhino level skin. It really gave me an ability to let things not really bother me, really focus on the task at hand or the goal at hand. As you know, Cliff, Wall Street is a pretty tough place. You could argue that it's probably one of the toughest environments in any industry in America, just given the stakes are high, the type of people that get attracted to the industry generally are very competent, very smart, but also highly political. Being born the way I was born, I think really prepared me well for Wall Street, allowed me to survive and thrive in that environment. Having now spent a lot of time in other industries like Silicon Valley and the entertainment industry, I'll tell you that when the stakes are really high and there's a lot of money at stake or a lot of value at stake, the need for thick skin and the need for grit doesn't go away. It may be a little less obvious, but Silicon Valley is just as tough at the higher levels as Wall Street. And I think that being born the way I was born really, really helped me throughout my career. Even now, when I have kids, I try to think about how do I build resiliency in them. And there's lots of different ways to do that. But in many ways, I was born to be resilient, because if I wasn't, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important story to tell. I think when you look at the community at this point, a lot of folks have special needs. And I think that perseverance and your folks, your parents, were the backbone to helping you move forward with a positive attitude. And you've done some amazing things in your life. You have a new book coming out, The Way of Wall Street Warrior. The book shares how to conquer corporate games using tips, tricks, and Smartcuts. Dave, you suggested that climbing the corporate ladder is a game. And in order to win, you need to learn what makes people tick. Can you explain how it's a game and how learning about people can help ensure success?
Yeah, a lot of this, Cliff, is based upon my own experience. I've seen not only rising the corporate ladder on Wall Street, but also having hundreds of clients during my career and seeing how certain people rise to the top of those companies, as well as seeing lots of companies in Silicon Valley, have very similar characteristics. And what I will tell you, and I think your audience will resonate with this, is that you look at any company anywhere in America today, and there are always people that you kind of look at and you wonder, like, how did that person get to that level? Or you kind of look at some of the people and you go like, wow, that person seems to be playing by a different set of rules. Either they're getting promoted really quickly and they seem to be sitting in the HOV lane of the company, or they seem to be stuck in the mud. That person seems really, really smart, really qualified. But maybe because of their gender or ethnicity, you look at them and like, wow, something about the system is not treating them the same way they treat this other person. And so as a young man rising through the top, I noticed that some of the rules of the game, if you will, are quite fluid. And frankly, because the rules are fluid, every company is different. There are lots of situations where I saw people not realize their full potential. I would say that where I saw it the most acutely was with women and with people of color. And that's not to try to disparage Caucasian men, by no means, because I've also done a lot of work in other countries. I will tell you that it is an inherent disadvantage of any group that does not belong to the majority. And the simple reason is because if you are in the majority, you tend to give people that look like you, that talk like you, that are you, you tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. Because you look at them and you go, you know, Dave may be a little bit of a screw up, but I was a screw up then too. I can empathize. And look how I turned out. I turned out, okay, I'm the boss now, right? By observation, by seeing a lot of this behavior, I started to realize that a lot of the things that I learned in business school didn't apply. A lot of the things that everyone was following didn't apply. And frankly, that was the reason why I decided I wanted to write down some of these tips and tricks that worked for me. Because for many, many years, I was one of the only people of color that reached the top at Jefferies, you know, at the managing director and co-head level. And I saw so much diversity at the junior level, but really willowing out of that by the time we got to mid-level or even senior management. And so I started to write down some of these ideas and things that worked well for me. Everything from, you know, how did I conduct myself in a meeting to how did I win friends, taking a page from Dale Carnegie. How did I negotiate compensation? How did I get promoted faster than everybody else? I started to write down some of the tactics I used. And originally, this was really a love letter to my two boys. I wanted to give them this as a present when they graduated from college. So I could say to them, okay, here are all the mistakes and the tips and tricks that your old man learned. Now here, go have a great career. This whole thing kind of snowballed into really a much bigger project to help anybody that feels disadvantaged in any way out there and turned into a book. After writing this book and writing down all of the things that I've learned, I'd say that one key theme behind what has made me successful is really understanding people and understanding that people are fundamentally irrational. People don't act like machines. People have their picadillos, they have their grudges, they have their biases. Really understanding how people tick and how they work has been core to my success as a business person. And I wanted to distill that into some book that would help people in some small way realize their own potential in their career.
I think that's extremely important. In other words, if you look at it, we're having discussions at the board level to make it more inclusive, to add women in those different minorities. They bring a very richness to the conversation. Also, the boards need to not just invite somebody to participate. The nominating committee needs to actively go out and look for those individuals that can make a positive contribution. So they got to be proactive. Now, the boards are usually risk management, but actually not being inclusive is actually creating the risk. So we see some of the private equity firms and venture capital firms are pushing back on the formation of what the board looks like. I think that's an important conversation to have. So I think what you're bringing forth is giving the tools to our young people. And I think your book may very well be a text that can be part of the reading material that's going to be mandatory within a Harvard and some of the other universities to really understand what the game is, not by accident, but understand what it looks like proactively and take an active role in it. But also take other individuals that are not, well, they're not white males, along with you for that ride, because you need to have and build a team that's vibrant. And I think that's a great message.
Cliff, just really briefly, just to add to what you just said, I think one of the things that I really fundamentally believe is that I don't think people fundamentally are bad. I think fundamentally people are trying to do the right thing. I think companies fundamentally are trying to do the right thing by getting more diversity, getting more gender diversity, more ethnic diversity. But I also do believe that one of the most powerful forces in nature is self-interest. And I believe that even good people, even though they're not out to get you, they're out to help themselves. And I think understanding what motivates people and knowing that people are not completely rational and that will act from time to time irrationally, I think getting to the heart of that is really core to being successful. It's really served me well when I think about someone that works for me or my boss or a client or an investor, trying to really understand what is this person motivated by? What do they prioritize most? And then how can I help them through building the right incentive mechanism? How can I help them achieve what they want, but also help myself at the same time? That's really, again, if I were to really summarize my overarching philosophy, it's that. I'm not sure that a lot of people are that good at that. And I don't think a lot of people think that way. Part of what I'm trying to do with my book and also with some of the other things I'm doing is I'm just trying to help people think of the world a little differently. Not that it's bad, but that people are highly self-interested and that understanding motivations is really the key to unlocking your own opportunity.
So what motivated you to write the book? What made you want to share what you've learned with others at this point? There's an underlying foundation. You're giving back.
I have such a huge belief in philanthropy. It really has become core to my being. I am so grateful, frankly, for my life. I think that I was born at the right time when technology existed to save a cleft baby. If I was born 50 years earlier, I'd be dead today. I wouldn't be alive. Believe the beneficiary of lots of other people, a little bit of luck, but a lot of other people helping you. And that if you have any modicum of success, I do believe that you have an obligation to help others. And I think that fundamentally will make the world a better place. I think if we all were completely self-interested and only cared about ourselves, then we would probably be working our way into extinction. As I have, built a good career, a wonderful family, have pretty much everything I've ever wanted and more, I've thought deeply about how do I give back to the community. That really was the catalyst that turned what was originally a 50-page career manifesto for my boys into like a book that I can share with the world, donate the proceeds from that book to charities. That's really what drove me to do this. I'm a reluctant author. I've never had an intent to write a 300-page book, but so be it. I saw a much more altruistic goal in mind in doing it. And so that was the reason why I did it. Glad I did it. And now feel I'm a little bit on a crusade. I'm really trying to think about how to amplify the teachings that are in my book, how to amplify and help people that feel disadvantaged. In my career, I've mentored hundreds of people directly. And I'll tell you, generally, people are very frustrated with their careers. Rarely found someone who felt that, yep, got it all done. A lot of times they feel like there is a game and the game rules are constantly changing and they're trying to figure out, how do I play this game so I can win? And when they don't, which is frankly most of the time, they feel really frustrated. And most of the time they leave and they go start their own company or they work in another company and then they get frustrated again. So that's really what I'm trying to do in some small way, is try to help alleviate some of those frustrations and give back what I've learned.
I think that's important. When you really look at the foundation of what education is at this point, between the middle school, high school, and the university at this level, the life skills sometimes are not really getting taught. How to be a mom, how to be a dad, how to work through the hierarchy that's inside an organization that you're going to work for. Most people will, they become unhappy. They fire their boss, they leave and they go to another organization at this point. But also the resources are online, salary.com, Glassdoor, to start looking at the profiles of what makes a company human, the culture in the company. So now the tools are there. Now the question is the individual going to do the due diligence that's in place to understand what you're getting into at that point? But that interviewing process, I think, is a positive place. And I think it's an important message, but it really needs to be taught at the university. So I'm excited. I want to read your book, and learn more about what you're bringing to the market and see if we can amplify what you're sharing. I think it's a vibrant message. It needs to be taught. We just can't leave it to the universities to teach.
And I'm often reminded of one of my favorite quotes, which was attributed to Albert Einstein. And it roughly goes with, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice, they are not. That's why I think you're not necessarily going to be able to learn this stuff in university. University is where, if I could roll back clock, I probably would have gotten a third degree in human psychology, because it's a fabulous field where we've really, in the last 10, 20 years, unlocked a lot of human behavior. On the face of it is highly irrational, but explains purchasing decisions, explains decisions. And it's this whole field of cognitive bias and behavioral economics. Rarely have we seen anyone then translate that into actionable tactics that work in your career. The fact that we know that people are risk averse or that they have affinity bias, how do I then use that to negotiate my salary? How do I then use that to get that promotion? And so those are some of the things that I cover in my book, where I go into that, because one of the things that I realized both at the time, but also in hindsight, is that I was pretty good at using some of those things to my advantage. It's clearly not illegal or unethical, but it's really just knowing more about your coworkers, your boss, your adversaries. I think a lot of people don't spend the time to really understand that and then think about how can I then use this amazing knowledge to help me realize my dreams.
Phenomenal. I'm really, really proud of what you bring forth to the industry. I look at my background. I had industrial psychology. I'm a Rochester Institute of Technology graduate, but that was a mandatory class. But it's helped me through my career. I've had over 250 employees report to me. It's just, presidents, CEOs, board directors. It's always about the team. They're individuals, but when you put people and you align them to the vision, the success of what the company can be and should be, you can really move mountains at this point. You can thrive. And I think you used that word earlier, to thrive. And I think that's the magic, is taking the concepts, but actually talking to the teams and then look at individuals and what motivates each individual. What obstacles can we move that allows people to do well? You've been touched hundreds of companies sitting in thousands of meetings, and you see the dynamics, but it was kind of unique that you took the time to make notes and to record your feelings and thoughts and now create a book on it. So I want to compliment you on that.
I really just want to add and echo what you just said, because I think it's a really important point that I analogize to parenting, which is there's lots of books, just like there's lots of books on management, there's lots of books on parenting. But the challenge with parenting and management is that almost all the stuff that we learn through books or through school are general in nature, because that's just the nature of the book and the academic industry. But the reality is every person is different. Every situation related to management, either up or down, is truly bespoke. Just like being a parent and raising a kid is truly bespoke. I have two boys and they're so different. The incentives that I use for one are completely different from another.
Very good.
And so I think really understanding at a high level that people are motivated by certain general characteristics, but then really crafting a bespoke management strategy around your employees, a bespoke management strategy around your boss or bosses. In a lot of industries, you have more than one boss to answer to. I think it's really key. I think that sometimes gets lost among the management gurus, the investment professionals out there, because we are, as an industry, we're kind of forced to generalize, just like the parenting industry has given general advice.
It's interesting because, I coach on an international level. I have clients in the Philippines, Australia, Germany, a few in the US too. And they're senior level executives, and you're looking at the dynamics within their organizations and their families, and you're seeing how it comes together. And it's an ecosystem. It doesn't take a lot to allow somebody to realize where the obstacles are. And here's some tools that you may consider that you could put into action, and watch the vibrantness of the feedback you're getting from the folks that you're reporting to or report to you. The accolades, I get from the clients is very rich, because they're putting tools to work and they're finding success. And that's the warmth. And you'll get the same thing in your book. You're going to get letters and emails and messages on Twitter and things of that nature, and LinkedIn, where they suggestions to work and how it made a positive impact in their lives. And it's magical at that point. You're certainly an expert in the investment space. What do you see the general trends shaping the markets now in the near future?
Speaking of finance and investing, I would say that I'm not an investment advisor, but I do manage my own money, have a long-only fund that we invest in. I would say that I'm generally a big believer in two key concepts. One is rate of return. Ultimately, all assets are fungible because money is fungible, and you're always looking for places to put your money and get return commensurate with the risk that you're taking, the risk-return trade-off, if you will. And I would tell you that I believe we are in uncharted territory, largely due to government bond issuances, which drive underlying yields. Almost 30% of all debt is now yielding negative returns. And let's think about that for a minute here, right? Like, essentially, you need to pay someone to borrow your money. If you lend someone $100, you expect $90 tomorrow. If it costs you to invest, really, we're in an uncharted territory where people are thinking about, like, how do I get commensurate return for the kind of risk I'm willing to take? And in fact, because everything is kind of a layer cake and everything builds upon this risk return trade-off, people are willing to bet on things that, frankly, we've never seen before. And so I think what you're seeing is essentially the overwhelming chasing of yield that's occurring across the globe. This is particularly amplified by the aging of the world and the need to generate returns to fund retirement pensions and other entitlements. Some of this mania, if you will, that you see in asset classes that are existing, like real estate, for instance, art, now kind of emerging categories like Bitcoin and NFTs.
Very good.
And frankly, anything that seems speculative, could have some upside, I think it is starting to inflate. And that's why you're seeing a lot of this activity in the market. So first and foremost, I think deeply about rate of return. And I think about a world where we have underlying negative rates. And I think about the fact that a lot of asset classes previously weren't really asset classes, have become asset classes because people are chasing yield. The second big principle that I follow, which is a little tongue in cheek, is really the greater fool theory. Investing and buying and selling is frankly all about the greater fool theory. I like to remind myself that something is not worth what you think it's worth. It's what someone else thinks it's worth. Unfortunately, the greater the fool, the higher the price. Now, again, I say fool with tongue in cheek, but it serves as kind of a metaphor for someone who is willing to pay the highest price with, frankly, all the same information as everybody else. And there's this concept in economics called the winner's curse, which essentially is that if everyone has the same information and you win the auction, then you've effectively acted irrationally. You are effectively the fool, right? And so I think what we're seeing right now is largely because of all this, underlying low rates and a lot of this deal heat going on and this feeling of FOMO and not wanting to fear of missing out. I think you're seeing a lot more people diving into assets that they know nothing about, and they're bidding those assets up, and it's just contributing to a lot of this asset inflation. And look, Cliff, that's not to say that there aren't going to be some mega winners. We've already seen, crypto billionaires and NFT billionaires and whatnot. But if I've learned anything in my career, having gone through multiple cycles, multiple asset bubbles and deflation, is that there's still going to be a lot of blood on the street when these things deflate. But there definitely will be some mega winners, just like the internet space back in the .com era. That was what birthed Amazon, right? Look at Jeff Bezos today. But there were also 99% of the other .coms that all went by the wayside. And we don't talk about any of those again. I think history will repeat itself. And so if I have any words of advice or counsel, is just be mindful of this. Be mindful of the fact that you are playing ultimately the risk return trade-off. You need to think about the markets that you're playing in. Is it a greater full market or not? Is the market really driven by mania or not? Yes, you can make money while the music's still playing, but eventually that song will end. And so you need to make sure that if you're still holding assets in that category, hopefully hold assets that actually have some real tangible worth, that actually do have some real utility and are not just there because of the greater fool theory. They're not just there because someone is hoping to offload that asset to someone else further on down the chain, if you will.
I'm impressed. You have a very good foundation of what's taking place. You get your finger on the pulse right now, what's going on. Due diligence, the area of expertise that you have, can you actually do the due diligence? Have you been in that field? I'm involved in some crypto and NFT, but light, you can do 1%, 5% of your assets. So you can step into it, but understand the risk and the volatility that's involved. I share that with our listeners. I'm going to ask you your feedback. When you look at the current challenges facing the industry now, what can our listeners, how are they going to overcome them?
Well, I think you need to understand your own personal risk reward trade-off, your own risk appetite, and every person is different. I will tell you that for myself, I think long and hard about, the equation of if I lost, half of my net worth, how would that change my life? Versus if I doubled my net worth, how would that change my life? What I constantly tell people that ask me for investment advice, aside from I'm not an investment advisor, so don't take my advice, is I tell them to think more about their own personal cost of capital. I tell them, don't worry about your buddy down the street that's making 10x on some crypto, or someone else down the street that just made 30% in the stock market by doing nothing. That to me is irrelevant. What matters is, what is your cost of capital? What do you need? If you have a corpus, if you have some core set of assets, what do you need to generate from your corpus in order to live the life that you want to live? Okay, that should be your North Star. And that should be how you decide how to diversify and invest. Because what would be a real crying shame, Cliff, if you did this exercise and you realize that, my personal cost of capital is like 5% a year, right? But then because of, trying to keep up with the Joneses and all this mania, I decided to put a big chunk of my money into crypto and to high risk asset classes, try to generate 30, 40%, obviously take on the risk associated with trying to generate 30, 40%. And my portfolio loses value and I start to eat into my corpus. It's a shame because in many ways you aimed way too high. You aimed for a return that you didn't need to aim for. But I think a lot of people don't think about investing the way I do, which is start with your personal cost of capital. Start with what do you really need, and then take on the risk commensurate to get to that number. And there's going to be some people who say like, well, look, I don't have enough saved and I need to roll the dice to be able to one day save. Okay, that's fine. But at least I think you're starting with the right foundation, which is figure it out for yourself first before you get caught up in what your neighbor is doing and what the Wall Street Journal is telling you are hot sectors, right? Because that's where I see people get into trouble. They start to try to keep up with the Joneses and they realize that they were shooting for a return that they really didn't need to. They could have taken a lot less risk because they didn't need, to hit that hurdle rate. Fundamentally, the risk that they gone was unnecessary. So that would be my general advice to your audience and to investors is to, kind of recast their portfolio and think of it from that light. And just, maybe it's a belt and suspenders thing. Like you can go, try to hit a certain hurdle rate with your portfolio because you love it, having a diversified portfolio. But maybe as one last check before you leave the aisle, before you walk out the door, it's just trying to think about what is your individual cost of capital and do you really need to take on that incremental risk or not?
I think it's sage advice, and I want to thank you for that. We see inflation coming up at this point. My last interview, they're saying 3 to 4% here, but it's probably 13 to 15%. So now when you start to really look at what's taking place at this point, assets are coming up, but it's the inflation that's creating the increase in the pricing. The supply chain is having some difficulty delivering. The container ships that are lined up in China and also LA and New York, they can't unload. There's some things going on. The market's a little bit more volatile. I think your message to reevaluate it, figure out what your real needs are. The other side, when we measure against other individuals at this point, they may be in debt, the people you're measuring against. So they may not have the resources and the assets that you have. They may be living over their means. The goal is to sleep at night.
Yeah, and I will tell you, in my opinion, one of the most insidious things in the world, that biggest cause of unhappiness is keeping up with the Joneses. Excellent. And constantly comparing yourself to other people and being spiteful over the fact that someone else appears to be doing better than you. You don't know their whole story. Like you said, you don't know whether ultimately their balance sheet is like an iceberg, right? You see the Ferrari and you see the beautiful home and whatnot, but you don't see below the waterline. You don't see the debt that they take on, or frankly, the risk that they've taken on, right, to live that kind of lifestyle. I'm a firm believer in just focus on what you can control. You can't control how other people are going to flash their cash. You can't control how the Chinese government might act one day with impunity around crypto or the Chinese internet stock market. You can't control any of that, right? But what you can control is your own cost of capital. You can control your lifestyle. You can figure out like, what can I ultimately spend, to live the life I want? And what is the minimum amount I need to generate in order to live that lifestyle? You can control that. And then build upon that. Obviously, a lot of things like investing are kind of out of your control, but make sure you put in all the right guardrails like diversification and try to invest in things that you kind of know something about, or ideally you're good at and an expert in. Kind of the way I think about these kinds of things.
Very grounded. I mean, the other side of it is, I'm having some conversations with my co-host, Seth Greene. When you look at the educational needs of our children, and the wealth that a family has at this point, it's another dynamic that we're trying to work together on collaboratively to help. Sometimes the second or third generation has lost those assets. So when you look at, you've got your own risk as an individual as the primary investor, but now we have the youth that's going to step in with that fiduciary responsibility to manage those assets. I think learning more, and I think we'll have conversations offline, Dave, what does that look like? Because you have two young children. I have three older children. Mine are, 29, 30, 32. Those conversations are important. I mean, the assets that people have earned and are putting to work, if there was an underlying business or something took place to create that foundational, resource. Did we teach the children the work that was involved? Dave, you worked hard for what you obtained. I've done the same thing. I'm self-made. The children may not realize that.
I have my own view on this, Cliff. I'm not sure it can be taught. And I'll go back to some of my cognitive bias type viewpoint, which is there's a very well-established theory known as the endowment effect, also known as the IKEA effect. What this means is that we tend to value things that we own more than other people value them. And the reason why the slang version of it is the IKEA effect is that you see this time and time again. I'm very subject to it. I buy, a cheap desk from IKEA, but I build it myself, right? And suddenly that becomes my favorite desk in my house, right? Because it's like, I built this thing with my own hands. And I think we see the same thing time and time again. When you earn something or you own something, you value it more than others. What I believe is that the best way to teach our children and the next generation the value of money and the value of what you built is actually make them work for it. And I'm not talking about like they need to replicate exactly what you've done, but I think they need to understand better and relate better to like, what does it take to build this family wealth? What does it take to build wealth, frankly, in this country when inflation, as you say, is going to be like 13, 14%, right? Like it's going to be hard, right? But I think we need to somehow figure out a way to give our children a taste of that so that in many ways, they have a little bit of an endowment effect, a little bit of an IKEA effect where they feel like, you know what? I now know how hard it is to earn $1. I know how hard it is to squirrel away $10 because I've had to do it, right? And I think that's part of the challenge when you look at generational wealth. A lot of times, the generations, by the time it gets down to the second or third or fourth generation, they don't really have to work for it. So they don't have this endowment effect. They don't have this feeling like I had to earn this, right? I fundamentally believe that if you don't have to work for it, I don't believe you value it as much. Again, that's my view. I'm not sure that that can be taught. I'm not sure that you can, lecture to your kids all day and go like, look, you really need to understand the value of money, right? I really think it needs to be learned through action and through work. But again, that's just my opinion on it.
I think, Dave, you're right. In other words, the idea is you could take some funds and you can have the financial advisor to work with the children and put a portfolio together and watch them actually do the investing it collaboratively. We can take our children to work, let them be involved in the day-to-day and rotate them through the various different departments inside our companies. I've done that multiple times and that was successful. I think you and I both have gone through internships, brought a vibrantness to the learning and collaborativeness and understanding what our peers are like and communicating and standing up and being able to articulate our ideas to a community or, to the company and the people that we report to. I think those are all winning concepts that we can bring forth, to our communities.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting anything extreme, but I reflect back on myself. I'll be honest, I'm a cheap bastard. Like I'm really cheap and I squirrel away every dollar. And I often even ask myself, like, why am I so cheap? And the reality is because one of my first jobs was I was essentially a janitor and a bagger at Safeway. And I earned $3.35 an hour.
Remember that.
And I'll tell you, nothing really teaches you the value of money when you realize that not only is your job to clean out latrines and toilets, but you're getting paid $3.35 an hour to do this. So again, I think there's nothing replaces doing. I think definitely teaching our kids, telling them the value of money is super helpful. Again, I think a lot of the things that you just said are great tips because I'm trying to do the same thing with my kids. And I'm hopeful that a combination of them hearing from dear old dad how hard it was in the old days, and then them actually having to work and do stuff, I think hopefully it builds a certain kind of character where they're going to be much more cognizant of the value of money and how hard it is to build wealth.
I agree with you. Dave, is there anything that I've not touched on that you would like to mention or add?
I think we covered pretty much all the things that I wanted to say. I just wanted to add I admire what you're doing. I think the more that we can share ideas and thoughts, the better. Hopefully, your audience got a sense of who I am, what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm a big believer in giving back to the extent that your audience is interested in buying my book. The proceeds are going to charity. If they're interested in potentially a bulk buy for their company or for their kids, that would be great, because I'm trying to not only spread the word on my book, but also spread the word on the charities and the good deeds that hopefully I'm able to do with this platform.
I consistently hear from my listeners that they enjoy creating paid internships and co-ops and summer jobs that provide vibrant learning opportunities for our youth. They find it a wonderful recruiting tool, as an internship programs provide opportunity to hire a known and mentor them into talented executives. I think we can agree the best leaders are great teachers and mentors. Please consider adding more women to participate in your paid internships. Each of us has a positive contribution of adding these type of programs to our organizations. Talk to our suppliers that they do the same. It changes the young lives for the better, and it personally feels great. Dave, thanks so much for spending this time with us and sharing your story. You have certainly overcome some challenges. You have not let them stop you from becoming very, very successful. You have plenty to share that benefits others. Our listeners should pre-order a copy of Dave's new book, The Way of the Wall Street Warrior. Again, that's The Way of the Wall Street Warrior. It's available on Amazon. Dave, I'll share your company's web address. It's lucrative.co, which is unique spelling. It's LIUCRATIVE.co. Again, that's LIUCRATIVE.co. Dave, would you like to share your contact information with our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the easiest way is they can just go to my website and they can either click on contact, which is one of the tabs there, or at the bottom of every page, they can add their email address and I'll contact them. If they have a question, they can reach out to me through there.
Thank you to our listeners. I look forward to being back with you shortly for another episode of the Private Equities Profits Podcast. This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC.